Today, we are diving deep into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. This is a future where humanity is scattered across a million worlds, just barely clinging to survival. But that survival, it comes at a cost that is almost too horrifying to imagine. It's a price paid in flesh, insanity, and with the very meaning of what it is to be human. And that brings up a really simple question.
I mean, think about it. Is it invaluable? Is it this precious thing, the sum of everything a person has ever done or could ever be? In our world, that's a question for poets. But in the Imperium of man, well, the answer is a whole lot simpler and a whole lot darker.
That's right. A human life is just raw material. It's a resource to be used up, burned through, and twisted in ways that are just nightmarish. So today, we're going to count down 6 of the most truly evil human experiments in all of Warhammer 40,000. A universe where the human body is no temple, it's a factory floor.
All right, kicking off our countdown at number 6, we've got the most common, the most widespread, and in a lot of ways, the most basic horror of the Imperium's entire infrastructure, servitorization. Seriously, these things are everywhere, but what exactly are they?
So here's the deal. Ages and ages ago, humanity built these incredible thinking machines, true AI called the Men of Iron, and they, nearly wiped humanity out. So now there's an absolute ironclad ban on abominable intelligence. But hey, the work's still got to get done, right? You still need robots and drones. So the tech priests of Mars came up with let's call it a grotesque biological loophole.
And this just shows you how cold and industrial it all is. Maybe you committed a crime, or maybe you were just available. You're strapped to a table, your skull is pried open, and all the parts of your brain that make you, your memories, your personality, your soul, they're just surgically cut out, burned away, or dissolved with chemicals. Anesthetic? Probably not. Then they get to work. Your arms get replaced with drills, your eyes with sensors, and your body is hardwired into a simple control unit. You are now a piece of equipment. And if some tiny flicker of your old self ever bubbles to the surface, that's a malfunction, and you get sent back for repairs.
Okay, coming in at number 5, we've got something a little different. Instead of just turning a person into an unthinking tool, this experiment rewrites their very soul into a machine that runs on nothing but pure, unadulterated rage. I'm talking about the butcher's nails.
So these things were originally invented for gladiatorial arenas. The owners needed fighters who would just never quit, never back down, never even think about surrender. So they came up with this absolutely diabolical idea. Instead of controlling people with the threat of pain, they rewired the brain so that the only escape from pain was violence. It's a bundle of neurocables drilled right into your skull, linking up the brain centers for pain, pleasure, and aggression into one horrible feedback loop. And this right here, this is what makes it so terrifying. It completely flips every survival instinct you have on its head. That feeling of peace, of just sitting quietly, to you, that now feels like pure searing agony. The only thing that makes the pain stop, the only relief you will ever feel again, comes from hurting something. Can you imagine being trapped in your own mind, where the only way to silence the screaming inside is to make someone else scream?
Wow. I mean, just let that sink in. The implant basically becomes a parasite that's hungry for rage. And the worst part? Once they're in, they can't come out. They physically grow into your brain tissue. Your life just becomes this constant, desperate battle, not just against your enemies on the battlefield, but against the agonizing moments of peace in between.
All right, at number 4, we're leaving behind purely physical or psychological torment, and we're heading straight into the spiritual. See, the Imperium is spread across the entire galaxy, and to talk to each other, they have to send messages through hell, basically, a dimension called the warp. And to do that, you need a very special and very unlucky psychic telephone operator.
Across the galaxy, people born with psychic powers, psychers, are rounded up and stuffed into massive prison ships. Most are just too dangerous to live, but the ones with real potential are brought to Earth for a ritual called soul binding. The idea is to basically weld their mind to the soul of the Emperor himself, giving them an anchor so they can shout messages through the warp without, being immediately possessed and eaten by demons. As you can probably guess, it's a high-risk procedure.
And yeah, A quick look at these numbers tells the whole grim story. You have roughly a 1 in 3 chance that your head just explodes from the psychic pressure. You have another 1 in 3 chance that your mind just shatters, leaving you hopelessly insane for the rest of your life. And if you're one of the lucky ones, you have a 1 in 3 chance of actually becoming the psychic telepath the Imperium needs. Those are your options.
That's how one of the survivors described it. Just try to imagine that. An infinite burning consciousness being crammed into your little finite mind. The few who make it through are almost always blasted blind, their optic nerves totally fried by the raw power, and for the rest of their lives, they sit in darkened chambers, chanting messages into a psychic abyss, knowing that one wrong thought could turn them into a gateway for absolute horror.
So we're in the top 3 now, and this is where things get even worse. Coming in at number 3 is an experiment where the government itself takes a human being and deliberately, methodically rebuilds them into a monster. When you have a problem that can't be solved with a quiet knife in the dark, you send in an Eversor assassin.
Now, an Eversor isn't a spy. They're not subtle. They are a weapon of pure terror. A screaming, drug-fueled hurricane of violence whose only job is to kill a target and everyone and everything near that target in the most spectacular and horrifying way possible. They aren't just an assassin, they're a message. And that message is, we can get to you anywhere, and there is nothing you can do to stop us.
So, how do you make one of these things? Well, the process is total. They usually start with an orphan nobody's going to miss. They reinforce their bones, slap in upgraded organs, and hardwire a whole pharmacy of combat drugs and stimulants right into their bloodstream. Their mind is wiped clean and reprogrammed for nothing but aggression. They're so unstable, they have to be kept frozen in cryostasis between missions. And, just for good measure, if an Eversor's heart stops, a bomb in their chest detonates, making sure their very last act is one of pure destruction.
At number 2, we have the work of one single, solitary man whose evil isn't measured by how many people he's killed, but in entire generations of suffering. His name is Fabius Bile. He's a geneticist with absolutely no morals, and his laboratory? Well, his laboratory is entire planets.
See, here's Bile's twisted genius. For him, experimenting on one person is boring. It's small time. Bile wants to create whole new species of humanity. To do that, he needs test subjects that can breed, that can pass on his twisted alterations to their children and their children's children, all while he watches from afar. He calls them his new men. And here's his method. It's horrifyingly simple. He finds a world on its knees, suffering from plague or famine. He shows up pretending to be a savior, offering them a cure. But that cure is actually a viral agent that rewrites their DNA. Then he just leaves. He comes back 50, maybe 100 years later to check on his work, to see how the grandchildren of the people he cured turned out. He'll call the failures, refine the bloodline, and then leave again. He's been doing this for 10,000 years. There are entire worlds out there that have no idea they're just another batch in his endless, monstrous experiment.
And that brings us to number 1. We've finally arrived. This is an experiment so foul, so deeply and profoundly evil, that it stands as a monument to the absolute worst the 41st millennium has to offer. This isn't about creating a better soldier or a weapon. This is about taking life itself and turning it into a grotesque industrial production line. This is the Daemon Kalaba.
So, a Chaos Space Marine warlord named Hansu had a logistics problem. See, making new Space Marines is a really slow, complicated process. He just didn't have time for all that. So he decided to build his own biological factory. And in this factory, human beings aren't people. They aren't even slaves. They're just infrastructure, parts in a machine.
The process is just a pipeline of pure nightmare fuel. Enslaved women are force-fed and surgically mutated into these enormous, mindless living wombs. Then they bring in captive boys. They're flayed alive, not because it helps the process, but just because it's faster than being careful. And they're sealed inside these wombs. A few days later, the candidate is cut out. If the product is viable, it moves on. If it's a failure, it's just flushed into the fortress's sewers, where some of them actually survive as these awful, skinless creatures.
And after all that pain and suffering and violation, here's the final brutal math. The success rate is 1 in 10. All of that horror for a 10% yield. The rest is just considered industrial waste. It is cruelty on a mass scale, purely for the sake of efficiency, and it's hard to imagine anything more evil than that.
So there you have it, a quick tour of a universe where human life has absolutely no value.
I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. If you were suddenly dropped into this reality, which one of these fates do you think you could possibly endure and still come out the other side calling yourself human? Something to think about.